Okay, so I want to start off by apologizing that this video took so long to get out. That's what happens when you're not a degenerate gamer. But anyway, this line of precision laptops, the 7510 and 20 series, and the 7710 and 20 series, go on eBay in a mixed use condition between $75 and $500, depending on the condition and layout. The larger 77 models can be used with larger Maxwell and Pascal Quadro GPUs, whereas the smaller 75 series is limited to about Maxwell at stock, and these laptops also have access to Radeon Pro GPUs. I want to give a shout out to Bad Dog Electronics on eBay and YouTube, by the way. He makes great stickers and they look great. I have them on 3 of my devices here. Even though I don't run Linux on this laptop anymore, it's a Windows only device. I do have all my other Linux devices. So go give his stickers a buy if you're looking for a nice sticker for a case badge or just to show what distro you're on. My 7510 I've also heavily modified. Firstly, I have a working GTX 1650 laptop GPU that I got from Shenzhen, China. And it also required a bit of INF modding, so if you were to do this yourself, you would need to go to Tech Power Up and get a tool called MV Clean Install, which makes it a lot easier. Otherwise you have to manually modify the INF files. And the Notebook Talks forum, if you go and look on that, it might be possible to get Ampere or Ada GPU working in one of these. I read somewhere on there that someone had a laptop 4070 working in these. As to where to get them, you would have to buy from a Chinese site like Xvision. My screen is also the 1080p ultra sharp touchscreen that Dell sold with these. This is a stock screen. However, people on Notebook Talks have gotten up to like high refresh 1440p panels, so it is possible to go above that. I just find 1080p 60Hz to be perfectly fine for a laptop. Let's go ahead and talk about CPUs, which is kind of the most important factor for these laptops. Most of the CPUs you're going to see are standard Skylake and Cabby i5s, i7s, and Xeons, and they are always going to be about quad core, maybe some dual cores, and they will usually have the HD 630 graphics, or some of the higher end Xeons from the Cabby Lake line use the P630 graphics, which is like a little bit better. All these standard CPUs can handle lighter 1080p gaming and daily use just fine. They can probably be undervolted. It depends on the BIOS version for these. My CPU is undervolted. There are 2 CPUs that stand out on these models of Precisions, the Xeon E3-1545 and the 1575M. Both are Skylake H, and there's no Cabby Lake version of these. On the surface level, if you were to look at a spec sheet, these just have a better iGPU and like higher clocks, but most people pass these up without knowing their potential. These 2 CPUs are essentially mobile successors of Intel's Crystalwell architecture, and it's kind of pushed to its conclusion with these. If you don't know what Crystalwell was, I'll link Iceberg Tech's video over the i7-5775C. So for my testing in particular, the Xeon E3-1545 that I have is able to access its full L4 cache pool when I turn on discrete mode only, and it really does boost gaming performance quite a bit. And this works for most games. Some of them it doesn't seem like it has an impact though. It's kind of, you have to test it on your own and see if it'll help or not, but I mean, these CPU benchmarks are pretty good. Keep in mind, this is a decade-old laptop quad-core CPU. I also tested Ada 64, which tests the memory and cache, and it doesn't really test L4 cache that well. So in my quick 2 runs, I did iGPU on and off, and the memory read increased from 42 160 megabytes per second to 43 330 megabytes per second, and the L3 cache speed increased in read from 185.24 gigabytes per second to 224.68 gigabytes per second. And I don't know if the L4 was influencing this. There could be more variables off, because turning off the iGPU gives the CPU more thermal room to kind of keep its boost clocks and whatnot, but it is an interesting result. Here are my benchmarks, by the way. I am running the latest version of Windows 11, and I always bypass it for these systems with Rufus. Every install of Windows 11, I also run the Chris Titus script. I use the standard profile, and then I take out like Edge and Copilot, all the AI crap in Xbox apps. And I also go through and manually remove most apps. Most of my Windows 11 installs runs at like 4 gigabytes of RAM and like low CPU usage. Here I'm showing the GPU and CPU tuning I got. The GPU is overclocked pretty highly, and the CPU is undervolted pretty well. Okay, this will be a common theme for a lot of these benchmarks, and I don't have too many to go through. I don't own quite a lot of games. But Rust here averaged about 51 FPS while it stabilized out, and it was running on the low preset, 1080p. I picked Koalacopter's map and decided to fly around on it because it introduces a lot of pop-in, which is a CPU stress and GPU. And the 1% lows were around 20 to 30 FPS, 0.1% around like 11. And I would be able to track that better, but MSI Afterburner was really just not one to work with me that day. I don't know if it's the weird laptop config or something else, so keep that in mind. Borderlands 3 came in averaging a bit of a higher FPS than the rest at about 60 flat. 1% was about 30 to 40. Again, hard to track without MSI Afterburning running to work with me. 1% were pretty bad until the system stabilized out. That is a unique behavior. It took about 2 to 5 minutes, and then the CPU like flattened out at about 50 to 60%, as you're seeing here. After it stabilizes, I mean, everything works great. It just takes a second to do that. I don't know if there's any more optimizations that can be made, or if it's a Windows 11 thing using Skylake, or just this CPU in general being a Skylake mobile CPU, but who knows. I decided to boot up a competitive shooter like Counter-Strike 2, and I did it with bots so I could load the CPU up more. And after it stabilized out, we're looking at 110 FPS on average, and the lows were 30 to 60, which is not great. It's probably just due to the settings I had it at, and I imagine if I capped it at like 80, 90, the lows would shoot up. So keep that in mind. I ran on the absolute lowest settings too to stress out the CPU a bit more. But yeah, Counter-Strike 2. I am not used to playing that, by the way, so my bad on the aim. Now, I had no hopes and dreams of Oblivion Remaster running well on this system, and that was guaranteed. This is on low with 50% downscaling. And after that, I decided to run XeSS, I did Performance XeSS. And as you can see, CPU utilization was up to 110% at the start, but after a while, it drops down to about 70 to 80, while the GPU just kind of maxes the whole time. 1% lows were like 1 FPS, and average was like 33. This game is not meant to run on this system. Maybe with a better GPU, it's possible, because we're looking at the CPU perform really well here. Just something to think about. This Cyberpunk gameplay is what you were seeing in the background earlier. I decided to do it on the low preset. I turned FSR off. Now, for some reason, this was the one game where you could argue the CPU was a limit and not the GPU. Regardless, the frame times were really good. I don't know if that's down to how optimized Cyberpunk is, or something else about the system, but the average was about 51 FPS. 1% was hitting mid 30s the most of the time. 0.1 was 23, 25-ish. I went ahead and ran 3D Mark Steel Nomad here, and the score kind of surprised me with the 622. Most laptop 1650s won't get that high, so it was probably a mix of the overclock and then maybe the CPU. Time Spy was a bit disappointing with its score though. Time Spy came back with the 2946 score though, so it ain't terrible for a 1650 system. Could have been better. Anyway, that's the performance of my Dell Precision 7510, and honestly I made this video because I felt like the performance is too good to not share. I feel like a lot of people nowadays are looking for a cheaper DDR4 laptop, especially with like the RAM prices and stuff, can get a really good deal on one of these, and you know, they're super modifiable and upgradable. Anyway, that's all I had to share. I hope everyone enjoyed the video, and I'll have more coming. If you have any ideas, let me know. I plan to, you know, occasionally, hopefully get back into like streaming every once in a while, but we will see. Anyway, have a good day.